Hey guys, it's Chris at Highline Guitars, and here's this week's quick tip for luthiers. You know, when it comes to talking about the tools that we use in building guitars, we tend to focus on the really fancy tools, like a bandsaw, CNC machine, a joiner, planer, drill press, drum sander. I've got a shop full of them, but there is one tool that you never hear luthiers and guitar builders ever talk about. And it's a tool that I find is extremely useful. And it's what I call a sand flat. You might have heard of it called a flat sanding surface. And what a flat sanding surface is exactly what the name implies. It's a surface that you can sand wood completely flat. And that's useful, for example, when you're going to be gluing a fretboard onto a neck. You need to have both those surfaces sanded absolutely flat so that when you glue the two together, there isn't going to be any gaps or an inconsistent glue line. And so it's a way of improving the craftsmanship. You can also use a flat sanding surface to sand the gluing surface between two blanks that you're going to be gluing together to make a guitar body blank. And you can use a flat sanding surface to sand the thin glue surface between two book match top plates. You can also use them to final thickness the bone nuts that you're going to be installing on your fretboard. So as you can see, there's a whole bunch of different reasons for having a flat sanding surface. Now, the best sanding surfaces that you can get are precision ground granite sanding blocks. Unfortunately, however, when you look at the sizes that you would need for what we typically would use them for as guitar builders, they start getting both extremely expensive and extremely heavy. It's not something that's really portable that you can just drag around your shop. Typically, you have to build a stand to wheel something like that around because they're so big and heavy. So what I've done is I've made my own flat sanding surface. And I'll tell you right off the bat, this is not a precision flat sanding surface. However, I have checked it with a precision straight edge, and it's pretty flat in my eyes. So, and having used it for quite a while now, it works extremely well. So let me bring you in close and I'll show you how I made this thing. Okay, to make my flat sanding surface, what I did was I took some 3/4 inch thick scrap interior grade plywood that I had left over from another project. And what I did was I cut two pieces. Both are 6.5 inches wide. The bottom one is 32 inches long, and then the top one is 30 inches long. And I glued those two pieces together so I'd have an inch overhang on each end. And that's to allow for clamping. And then for the top, what I needed was a reasonably durable, absolutely flat surface. So what I did was I ran down to my local Home Depot and I bought just a section of laminated floorboard. And I chose a piece that has on the decorative surface a completely flat surface instead of a textured surface. You don't want texture at all. You want it to be as flat as possible. And this has a little bit of texture as far as it's a fairly consistent, you'd have to look at it with a microscope, I think, to see it. But the backside is absolutely flat. So what I did was I trimmed it to fit that top 30 inch long, 6.5 inch wide piece of 3/4 inch plywood. And then I just drizzled CA glue all over the decorative surface, laid it down and let it dry. And that's how I got this really nice flat surface. And I'll show you how I use it. For most of the sanding operations I do, I'll just use a long strip of 2 3/4 inch wide. This is 80 grit sandpaper roll. And I actually get this from Harbor Freight. They sell those rolls for like $8 a roll, and you can get 80 grit, I think like a 150 and then like a 240, something like that. But I'll clamp down one end, and I'm clamping both the sandpaper as well as the end of my sanding surface to my workbench. And then I just pull it tight, fold it down, and grab another clamp, and I'll clamp it like that. And that attaches the sandpaper to the surface. Now I'm ready to sand. And really, it comes down to a little bit of technique here. And this is a technique I learned years ago when I was hand grinding and polishing high precision telescope mirrors. The key is to constantly change the orientation of the wood. And that way, if there are any imperfections in the surface, you cancel them out by constantly changing the surface. So I'll just begin sanding. And I'll continue that way. I like to count the number of strokes. So I'll do like 10 strokes sanding, just like you see here. And then I'll turn it around and count another 10 strokes. And that way I get a pretty consistent flat surface as I'm sanding. And then once I have finished sanding this surface and then the back of my fretboard, I can glue the two together, and I'm not going to have any problems with gaps running along the seam. And that's just a way of really taking your craftsmanship up a notch. This is another way that you can use this sand flat tool. I've got it clamped to the end of my workbench with these two clamps here, which is also holding the sandpaper to the surface. But then what I've done is I've added a fence, and this fence was made from some scrap hickory. And when it's clamped down to the flat sanding surface, it's at a perfect 90-degree angle, and I've actually checked that with my machinist square. So what I can use this for is a way to ensure that as I'm sanding a piece of wood like this, the heel sides of this guitar neck, I'm keeping it that surface absolutely parallel to the sandpaper. And I can very accurately sand that surface so that it is at a perfect 90-degree angle to the glue surface. And as you can imagine, that will allow me to insert this neck into the pocket on a guitar body and not have any gaps, because I would be using this shape to route that pocket into the guitar body if I was routing it by hand. But this does a really nice job of sanding that flat. You can also sand the bottom flat. So there you have it. This is just a simple, inexpensive tool that can really improve the overall craftsmanship of your guitars. And it's a tool that I find myself constantly reaching for to solve some of the issues that I might have during a guitar build, where I need to make sure that I have one or more surfaces absolutely dead flat. So